The Unification Church has become more and more needed. Perfection cannot be realized without restoration through indemnity, which is accomplished through unity. The perfection of the whole comes from the indemnity of the whole. Therefore, we can conclude that indemnity means unity among enemies. If enemies unite with each other and offer themselves to God as sacrifices, and God accepts them, the purpose of religion will be fulfilled. Until now, only those who have been most loved by God have been offered on the altar. But today, even those who are loved by Satan are offered on the altar. If they are accepted by God, then the role of religion will be complete. No religion will be necessary after that. Humankind can simply live with God, as was originally intended. Religion exists only because of the need for separation from Satan. When offerings anywhere are made to God, He will accept them. We have to make offerings on the worldwide level. Therefore, what Reverend Moon of the Unification Church must do first is to love his enemies. That is the principle. So, the main topic of my message today is, of course, what does it mean to love our enemies and to have relationships centered on true love. You know, the song, "We Need Ordinary Love," when I heard it, I thought what it's really saying is we need to have original love, the real love that God originally intended us to have. So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about my experiences. My wife and I, Sharon and I, went to France, and fortunately, we didn't spend any time in Paris, even though it took us an hour and a half to get from the airport to the train station. But we were here, in a little area called Clermont-Ferrand, and it's a very beautiful area in the middle of France, and it's famous for volcanoes. And this is Tobias and Shauna standing in front of a typical cathedral, 600, 700, 800 years old. And then, I knew you had to see this, picture. So there she is, Chloe, and what's his name? And there's Chloe with Mrs. Pace trying to bite her hand. And there we are in a typical French village, actually, and it was extremely beautiful. And what really stands out, of course, is everything is in stone. It's all rocks and stones, and because that was the nature, especially this area is a volcanic area. So there was a lot of stones and not so much wood, so the people made everything. This is a picture of me in the center of Clermont-Ferrand, and right up here is a peak, and there's a series of peaks that are all volcanoes from millions of years ago. Have you ever heard of Volvic water? It comes from this area because the volcanoes created a land that acts as a filter. And so when it rains, the water is filtered through these volcanic filter systems and come out as pure water. This is us at the Volvic factory with one of Shauna's friends. And this is us with Gabriella. Biliana. That was Gabriella. This is Biliana. And I want to begin by telling a little story about her. She's half Serbian and half Croatian. And when she was 9 years old, she lived with her father, who was Serbian, her mother, who was Croatian, and they lived in Serbia in their grandfather's home. The grandfather was Serbian. Then in the 1990s, this terrible event took place, this genocide between Serbians and Croatians. And her family got the word that they had to leave. And so she and her sister and her mother and father and their family all left Serbia to go to Croatia. But her her grandfather stayed behind at his home. Then terrible things happened, and then 5 years later, she was in Croatia with her family, and a Serbian soldier came to visit. And he was a young man. He was about 25, 26 years old. And he came to speak to their family. And he wanted to tell them about what happened to her grandfather, because he was a Serbian soldier that was there in the house at the time the Serbian soldiers came. And she said that she heard this soldier talking to their family. And he explained that when they went in, they demanded that her grandfather pledge his allegiance to Serbia and say, you're a Serbian citizen, so are you with us? And at that time, because his daughter-in-law was Croatian, and his son loved his daughter-in-law, and his grandchildren were both Croatian and Serbian, he said, I can't. He said, I can't identify with one nation or the other. He said, I can only say I'm a human being. And I just am a person, a normal person. And because of that, they killed him. They didn't just kill him, they cut his body up into pieces and threw it around the house. And this Serbian soldier was here telling this story to this man's son. And he was begging forgiveness. He said, please forgive me for what I did. And she says she saw her father embracing him, and everyone, of course, was crying. And so her father was able to forgive him. But this soldier, this time, 5 years later, he felt compelled, he had to come and look up their family. So not too long after that, they went back to Serbia, and Biljana wouldn't go into the house, but her older sister went into the house, and she said when they went in, there was blood everywhere. But her sister said it was a very strange feeling. Even though there was blood everywhere, I felt very peaceful. I felt very calm, and that everything was going to be okay. And I asked her later, I said, did you ever have any dreams or anything? And she told me, she said, well, one time she was on a bus going between Serbia and Croatia, and she fell asleep, and she had a dream, and her grandfather was there, and he was very happy and peaceful, and he made her feel very comfortable. And it was a very kind of a brief imagery of him, and she felt very good, and she opened her eyes. And the moment she opened her eyes, the bus had just come to a crossroads. And if the bus would turn right, it would go back to her home where she lived in Serbia. But it was supposed to go left, and it would go left, and it would take her to her journey. But she felt this dream, this experience came at exactly the moment when she opened her eyes. She was right there to look at this sign that pointed to her home. So I'm telling you this story because we know, based on the teaching of the principle, how important this whole process of restoration through indemnity, of restoring the heart between Cain and Abel, between enemies. I was very grateful that I was able to teach her. She's been studying the principle, and I was able to give her the parallels of history and introduce her to the idea that maybe, just maybe, the Messiah is on the earth, or was on the earth. And she's very moved, and she's very serious, and she really wants to study the principle. She's very close to Shauna and our family. And of course, you talk about things like, we use terms like prepared people, right? She understands very profoundly and very personally about this restoration through indemnity, the indemnity of heart. So I was so impressed and moved by her story. So one of the experiences we had is one brother named David Perry and his wife, what's her name?
Perry.
Sylvie.
Sylvia.
His wife, not Sylvia, but Sylvie. That's why I remember it, because it's not Sylvia, it's Sylvie. And she works for many, many years with Christian Bernard, which was one of our companies that became very successful in France. And so David Perry, as an American, and his wife took some vehicle, borrowed a vehicle from a friend and their own car, and they brought us to Normandy so that we could go to certain places. This was a museum in the middle of a town called Caen, and this was the largest city before you come to the beaches of Normandy, where the invasion of D-Day took place. And this was an underground bunker. Down underground here for hundreds of feet is where the Germans made their headquarters in preparation for any kind of an invasion that might take place, because they certainly were expecting something to happen eventually. And this is where they had their headquarters, but this place has been turned into a museum. This is us with Tobias and Shauna and David and his wife Sylvie, and you'll notice there's the flags of all nations. All the nations that were involved are here. And this is really a museum of healing, because it gives honor, and not honor, but it shows a sympathy or a respect to even the enemy nations that participated in this terrible event that took place. So even the German flag is flown here. This is a map of the area. Right here is the city of Caen. And I found out that on this, we got there just a few days after the 70th anniversary of the invasion of D-Day. And these are this is the places where the Allies landed. This is the American cemetery. These are the British cemeteries, and these are the German cemeteries. This city, for a long period of time, this city was standing because, the Germans occupied the city, but, they didn't want to destroy the city because they were living in it. But when the invasion came, after the invasion of Normandy, the situation was so difficult and the Germans were so dug in that the Allies had to bomb the city. They had to bomb the entire area so continuously and so totally that they destroyed almost everything that was in the city. And the entire city had to be later rebuilt. And the people there, they have mixed feelings. Because of course, they're grateful, that the Allies would come and liberate their country. And most of France, anyone living outside of this area is, easily grateful. But the people of this city, they have mixed feelings, because it was the Allies that really destroyed or did the most damage to their city. And they felt, to a certain extent, maybe it was a kind of overkill. But in any event, this situation took place. So this city has become a center of resolve to bring together, the Allies and the Axis and those who fought in the war. So one of the first places we visited was the Germans' cemetery. It says that until 1947, this was an American cemetery. The remains were exhumed and shipped to the United States. It has been German since 1948. And contains over 21,000 graves. With its melancholy rigor, it is a graveyard for soldiers, not all of whom had chosen either the cause or the fight. They too have found rest and our soil of France. So I was, obviously, I was very moved to be able to visit this kind of a place. American soldiers were buried here, and then they were dug up and taken back home, and then 21,000 soldiers from Germany were buried here. So to come here with Tobias, and these are German soldiers who come and take care of this area. These are the gravestones. There's 21,000 of them in this entire area. And when I read the names and I looked at the dates and I looked at how young so many 18, 19, 20-year-olds they died June 7th, June 8th, June 20th, June 30th, July 15th, all during those first months of this invasion. And they're all buried there. And it was so deep and so wonderful. And David, who has been here many times, explained that when he first went to this German cemetery, it didn't seem to be very well kept, and he felt a little bit bad. But this time when we went there, he was surprised to see how well the area had been taken care of, and that it was really beautiful, and that to read and realize that these soldiers, again, not necessarily by their own choice, but inevitably caught up in such a difficult situation, to be in a foreign land and to be fighting for a cause that ultimately is a cause that they can't win, because they weren't on the side that could win at that time. So I felt very grateful to have the opportunity. The next place we went to is called Pointe de la Hawk. This is right next to Utah Beach. And this is an area where on the morning of June 6th, just as the invasion was going to begin, 225 Rangers had to land, and they had to scale these walls. And they had to try to destroy these huge guns that the Germans had in place. Because if those guns remained there, they could destroy anything up and down Utah and Omaha Beach. And so 225 Rangers, during the middle of the night, were trying to scale these walls while German army and military were shooting down at them from the top. And out of 225 of them, only 90 survived. But when they got to the top, the guns had been removed. And so they captured this area, and then they had to fight several bloody battles for the next 48 hours to prevent the German forces from coming back and taking this peak again. And this is good. You don't need to see me. So I look at this picture, and I think this half of the picture is, the whole picture is just like a beautiful place where you take your family to go to the beach. But at the same time, the history is so profound and serious. How many people gave their lives and suffered and sacrificed at this beach so that we could be free, so that we could continue. Ultimately, the reason these people were giving their lives, be they Germans, be they American, be they French, be they the Japanese, be they the Koreans, be they the Italians, whoever it was in World War II, the people giving their lives were paying the indemnity and making the condition so that God's providence could advance, so that ultimately the true parents would be able to come and would be able to bring the true love of God from the individual to the family, to the society, to the nation, to the world. This is the reality of what took place 70 years ago. But then to be there and to have our family there at this beautiful beach, it was such a feeling, a mixed feeling, just like Biliana when she said that her sister, standing in the middle of a room where her grandfather had been killed, with blood still on the walls because they didn't even bother to clean the place. They just took the bodies out and left the area. She still felt at peace. And we, brothers and sisters, we have to remember and feel this sense of fulfillment and accomplishment and confidence that God has worked and this providence has advanced, and we can now be free to love and to be united. Then we went to the cemetery where the American soldiers are. And when we got there, there was some special flag lowering ceremony going on. Every day they do that, but this time it was a little bit special, and Shauna found out later that it was because some of the people that had been working at this, some of the French soldiers that had been stationed at this particular cemetery for many months prior to the 70-year anniversary were going to be leaving. So they had a special opportunity, and I think they were going to be given, a flag from the cemetery. When you get there, these crosses are so perfectly aligned. Every single cross is absolutely, perfectly in place. And this is well taken care of. And this soil, it's not French soil. It belongs to America because the French gave it over to America. And so it's when you enter, there's a sign that says you are entering an American cemetery. And it gives a list of things, you can't bring pets and things like that. I was, it was, to be very honest with you, I didn't cry a lot when I was there, but, thinking about it and reflecting on it now, it was a very beautiful experience. And you can't see any of them, unfortunately, but in some cases, some of the soldiers were not Christians. These are all Christian crosses here. Some of them were Jewish. So intermittently, you will see, instead of a cross, you will see a Star of David, a white Star of David in place of the cross, where the Jewish soldiers fell and are buried here, if they had Jewish roots. This cemetery overlooks the beach of Omaha Beach, where thousands of these soldiers that are buried here actually died that day, and the coming weeks during this very difficult operation that took place all through France and then into Germany. So this is our family looking out from the cemetery to Omaha Beach, and this is all where the invasion took place. But it's such a beautiful area. The grass is so green, and we were there at such a beautiful time of the year. All the farmlands had the crops in them still because the wheat, the barley, and the rye, and all the grains and everything, where Tobias and Shauna lived in the area, and where his family lived. So this is the beaches. It's hard to, and the sand, I picked up the sand, and when you try to hold the sand like this, and it's so fine, it falls between your fingers, like in an hourglass. I've never been to a beach that had such fine sand. And it's just a beautiful beach in every way you look at it. So I want to finish with Father's words, explaining clearly. It's important to love your enemy. Why did God make effort to teach us that loving the enemy is important? It is natural to hate our enemies. Why has God taught us that we must love our enemies? Theologians and philosophers have asked this question repeatedly, but no one has really understood the answer. You must understand it clearly. Throughout history, Satan has said to God, in order for you to be God, you must always maintain the standard of the eternal ideal. When you made me the archangel, did you do it so just in order to love me temporarily or to love me forever? God has had to reply, forever. If God were to love only temporarily, then he would be like Satan. If you have no standard of loving forever, you cannot show God's dignity to Satan. In order for God to be God, he must love Satan no matter how much Satan is opposing him. Satan has said to God, I fell and became evil, but you who are good can never change, and you can never do the things that I do. I like to fight, but you must not like to fight. You must be silent, even if you are beaten. Hence, God must not resist. It is the same for God's representatives. No matter how much suffering you may have to experience, you have to love the archangel until the ideal of heaven is completely established in this world. Because all the world is connected to Satan, God can't simply cut off from Satan. He must always love Satan so that the fallen archangel will finally say, God is indeed God. I surrender to you. God is bound with that problem. Because you are trying to go to the heavenly kingdom to live with God, as you were originally intended to do, Satan is testing you. As God's child, you should walk the same path of unconditional love and righteousness, inheriting from your parent. You have to be able to say to Satan, don't you agree that I am a child of God? And Satan has to say, yes, it's true. Therefore, if you want to go to the heavenly kingdom, you have to take the same position as God and ultimately love Satan, even though you are persecuted by this world, which is the realm of the enemy. You must love. You have to fulfill that condition. It might look simple, but this is the boundary line between God and Satan. God must not regard his enemy as an enemy, and he cannot take revenge. In giving his Son to be crucified, God showed ultimate love for his enemy. What God's Son did in this circumstance was also of crucial importance. If Jesus had hated his enemies when he was about to die, the providence of God could not have been realized. Instead, Jesus prayed for his enemies, thus overcoming the tragic situation through love. As a result, Satan began to surrender. Because of this, Jesus was able to gain the absolute qualification to be God's true child. Satan had to give his signature. During this 3-year emergency time period, the mandate to love your enemy in the Bible is to be accomplished. Ordinary Christians have believed that those words of Jesus refer to the enemy as an individual, but that is not all. Your enemy could be a nation or even the world. Countries that have been enemies become the starting point of our heavenly kingdom. There is no ideology which is greater than one founded upon the maxim, love your enemies. Once this tradition of love is established, no other ideology will be necessary. In my understanding, Father's explaining that, in the original ideal, God created the archangel for the same purpose, ultimately, that he created his own sons and daughters, Adam and Eve. That they were supposed to collectively work together. They're supposed to have a relationship centered on love with each other. Even the archangel was meant to become an object of God's love through Adam and Eve. And his original position has to be preserved. But he became Satan. And then Satan influenced fallen Adam and fallen Eve. And then Satan influenced the children, Cain and Abel. And they became people who had false love. And so all of the history of restoration through indemnity, the purpose is to restore love, to recreate and establish the original love, the ordinary love, the simple, true love that's supposed to come from true parents to true children and to the rest of the creation, of which the archangel is part of. So that's why true parents, that's why Jesus had to go through such a suffering course and had to keep his heart of love and forgiveness, even to those who were killing him. That's why true parents lived such a difficult life, being tortured unto death, going to live in Hungnam prison for 2 years and 8 months, and then loving the enemy nations. Because in his heart, he saw, these are not my enemy. These are my brothers and my sisters. These are my cousins. These are my nieces and my nephews. You know, everyone is related from God's original point of view. And that original point of view had to be reestablished. And that's what the Messiah comes to do. Jesus began the process, and our true parents completed it. They completed it on the foundation of such a history of suffering and sacrifice. But that history is done. It is finished. It is completed. And now we are free. We are free to love with no boundaries, with no indemnity to be paid anymore. It is truly finished. So we have no excuse. This is our challenge. Inside our own hearts, we have no excuse. If we don't love other people, we can't accuse Satan or accuse, because you're German, or because, you're the enemy. No. God has made it abundantly clear. I really experienced this. I felt so strongly when I was in France and, with my in-laws, that this doesn't have anything to do with the historical problem anymore. If there's any problem between us, it's a problem of original heart, that we're not loving each other as brothers and sisters, and that's our challenge, and that's what we have to fulfill and accomplish. So this is this little town. It's a village of only about 438 people. And, the surrounding area is so beautiful. This is Tobias and his mother. And even inside the village, this right there at a crossroads of this little village is this statue, I guess from 1938, of Jesus on the cross. I mean, every village has a small, not a chapel, but
a garden type of.
Well, it has a church, but it's not a church. It was a cathedral. It would be called a cathedral because it was all connected to the, Catholic and Orthodox Church. But even the small villages have small cathedrals, and there's. So the conclusion.
They go back. Oh my God. So
Yeah. So this is us. So this is the fruit of a long history. And all of us are this fruit. Everyone here, especially in this room, obviously, mixed racial marriages, between countries, the Japanese, the Americans, the Koreans, the French, the Germans, countries that were enemies. We're not enemies anymore. We haven't been enemies since God's providence has advanced. And our movement, the unification movement, was meant to pay the final indemnity. Our lives, our marriages, our relationships with each other. Father made it abundantly clear when he sent missionaries out, that our mission was to unite with each other, to love each other, to fulfill God's ideal with each other. So I really, during my time in France and my experiences with Tobias and his family, I really feel we've done it. We've really done it. And I don't mean we, our family, I mean we, us, in this room, and our members. Every single person that ever tried to support, true parents, and has made an effort to try to follow the standard of love that true parents established. Even if we fell away, even if we made mistakes, even if we were screwed up during the course, it doesn't matter. Because everything is about learning and growing and becoming closer and closer to God's ideal of true love. So we may not be there yet. Maybe some of us are even far away. But it doesn't matter on one level, because the standard has been established and achieved. And the ideal can be realized now. It's a wonderful thing. It's a beautiful thing. We're living in such a precious moment, such a precious time. So if we can have this heart of true love and can share it with our neighbors, with our friends, with each other, then God will work powerfully, and God will help people to come to have the same standard of love. Everyone is attracted to true love. That's why ultimately, that's why we joined and why we stayed. Because of true love. Love and truth. The love and the truth. The divine principle and the experiences that we had. So, thank you very much for being here, and I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to be able to go to France and visit and to see these places, and it was really a wonderful experience. But wherever we live, wherever we are, we need to realize God is with us. God is everywhere. There is no point on this earth. There isn't even any place in your mind you can go where God can't be. So let us learn the lessons of the principle of restoration through indemnity, and let us now consummate and finish and complete God's ideal in our own hearts and in our families and in our community, in our nations, in our world. Okay, thank you. I'd like to offer a prayer, then we'll have a closing. Dearest Heavenly Parent God, thank you so very much that through these words of our true parents, and my wife and I, Sharon and I, could have the experience of traveling to France, and meeting our in-laws, and Tobias and his family, and have the experience of going to these historical places. Just thank you so very much that we live at an age when we can become people of true love, that we are free to love, that only inside of ourselves, our own concepts, our own wrong way of thinking or feeling, the limitations that we have are something inside that are our own barrier, that you've sent us, our true parents, and through them you created a way, a path for us to come back to the kingdom of heaven. If we only are willing to go on that path and become persons of true love. Thank you for your patience with us, so much patience throughout history, putting up with so much suffering and sacrifice, and allowing people that you loved to be sacrificed again and again, knowing that ultimately everyone will be saved. Everyone will learn their lessons eventually, and everyone will be able to become your true son and true daughter, or a true angelic being. Thank you. We offer our prayers collectively as blessed central families and as a community centered on true parents and the teaching of the divine principle and the sacrifices that were made through history, not only by Abel-like nations, but even Cain-like nations. Everyone has collectively paid a price for fallen nature and for the fall of man. And even Satan can go back to being the archangel Lucifer and to restoring his self to his original position. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Parent. And we offer our prayers to you and report these things collectively as your sons and daughters. And in my name, John Pace, with Sharon Pace, as the Blessed Central Family, we say Amen and Adieu.